I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Yeah, you probably know that one. It's poet Robert Burns, and he used the forest to symbolize the mysteries of life and how each of us journey into the unknown. And we want to do as much as we can before we die. Basically, that's his idea. It's probably one of the nicer versions of what people tend to think about the woods. The woods have been a reliable source of symbolism in literature since the beginning of storytelling. It can be a testing ground where a child becomes an adult on the other side. It can be the place where the mysteries of life and death are hidden. It can also be symbolic of our own unconscious, the mysteries of our own minds. And back when the campfire was the center of the village, the woods were the first home of the other, that dangerous creature or magical being that was either trying to lure you away from the safety of the tribe or plotting to invade the tribe itself. Woods are often seen as sinister, dangerous. So it's no surprise that horror films are right at home in the darkest of the forests. And to talk about some of the most interesting horror films that take us into the woods outside and even the woods within are my guests, Hope Madden and George Wolf from the excellent Fright Club Podcast. Folks, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
I really appreciate how it went when I came on Fright Club. I've been on there a couple times to talk about the 10 best horror movie endings, and I really enjoyed the style. And I really liked a discussion on another show about the Hounds of Love on the realism in horror episode. That's a movie that so few people that I know, if I bring it up, they're like going, "Oh yeah, okay, Hounds of Love." I'm like, no, what? It's hard viewing, but it's a really good movie. So I want to start with a question. First question, have either of you lived near the woods, or was there any local legends about your woods when you were growing up?
I just have a pathological terror of the woods. And I'm from rural Ohio. So there was, everything in the area with, I'm absolutely terrified of the woods.
Oh, wow. George, how about yourself?
I don't really have that. I was around the woods. I'm also from rural Ohio. My grandfather had a great farm that I enjoyed spending time on. So I don't really have that fear, but I enjoy going along for the ride when she has it.
Sure. Have you ever gotten lost in the woods?
I would have to go in, wouldn't I?
Right. You would have to go in.
It's actually funny. My twin sister moved to Vermont, which is our most heavily wooded state. I'm sure she went there to get away from me. And they live smack in the middle, like out every window is woods. There is not a neighbor. So I go out there because she has two lovely daughters that I like to see. And they, of course, walk in the woods because that's what they did, a dog. And we were out there the one time and these little girls are just showing me mushrooms and showing me, and I really never spent I kept thinking to myself, first of all, there's a lot of bugs out here. Like, why does anybody want to be here? This is terrible. And then off in the distance, I can see a man. And it's just a regular man. It's like a man in loafers and a shaker knit sweater. It's a dude. It's just a regular. I picked up one girl under each arm, fireman carry, and just took off. I just took off her home. I'm like, it's a man. We're in the woods. Everybody panic. So I'm just not cut out for it.
Well, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and the woods there had a lot of legends to them. There were certain areas, if you went, it was cursed. If you went to other places, there was this really freaky guy that lived out there. So the witch and the goblin kind of industrialized themselves over time. But here I am. I live in Northern California, and I spend a lot of time in the woods. That's supposed to be like my serenity break, right? But every time I go, there's a big sign on any of the regional parks, and it says, beware of ticks, rattlesnakes, mountain lions, coyotes, poison mushrooms, blue-green algae. So the danger is always there. During the day, even on a nice manicured path, we fool ourselves that we are not in the wilderness of where it's dangerous. And I actually got lost not very long ago. I think after we had talked about doing this show, I'm like, I think I'll go into the woods. And I went into this state park that I hadn't been to before, and I got turned around. And I'm usually Johnny Boy Scout. I was in the military. I do all this different stuff. And I still got turned around down in the Santa Cruz Mountains where it's really lush. And it only took about 10 minutes of realizing that I was disoriented and not being able to rectify that in 10 minutes and coming across the same exact thing that I had walked by as a landmark and went, oh shit. And I was like, okay, every demon is here and there are mountain lions behind every rock. The rattlesnakes are going to get me. You know, I'm in shorts and I'm going, I have one thing of water and I have a Bowie knife. And okay, this is going to be really interesting. Welcome to the gray. You know, I'm going to fight my way through all of this. But it's a very primal fear. And even when you are acclimated to the woods, if you have a respect of it, there's still that engine that drives you towards being very nervous. And I think that's one of the things that drives the first film that we're going to discuss, and that's the Blair Witch Project. And who wants to give a little bit of a shout out on the plot or the idea behind the Blair Witch?
Well, it was Daniel Merrick and Eduardo Sanchez, and they were really the first truly popular found footage film. And they were also really the first, because it was the late 90s, to have a viral marketing campaign. And I think that's one of the things that worked the best for this, is that because it was found footage, which had not been done in this way before, of course, Cannibal Holocaust, a lot of people point to, but it's not really found footage. Just my point is not that. The hyper-realism of the footage and the idea, the story that had been just found somewhere, plus this viral marketing campaign, none of it cost them anything to do, and it made the whole world, which was interesting enough, really interested in seeing what amounted, as far as they knew, to a snuff film. And then people were lining up. They're like, "Oh my God, these kids are dead, and here's footage. Let's go watch it." And which is really alarming, I think, an alarming sort of testament to what we're like as an American population.
Yeah, and I think it's very fascinating now to continue to talk about it, because it's so hard to remove yourself from the cultural phenomenon that followed that movie and remember how it was before people caught on.
Right.
Because now you look back on it, you have to strip away that baggage that has come with all those years to really remember what it was like when you first saw it and how effective it was.
Of course, the plot itself, which is three documentarians going into Maryland, right? Maryland,
right?
To create a short documentary about the legend of the Blair Witch, and then they're lost forever, but we find their footage.
Right. And I think some things that you're talking about, both of you, that are really interesting to me is how Blair Witch really, as far as I'm concerned, it reinvigorated horror films after we had this glossy desert of the 1990s, where we had so many of the movies were overproduced. They looked fantastic. They had beautiful kids in them from the WB and things like that. Most of them were more mysteries than they were horror films. And then you had this movie that came out of nowhere, and it really played on the audience's expectations. Because I think that whether you're a film theorist or a real film lover or not, you learn the patterns of films.
Yes.
And you go into certain movies with expectations. And so people went into Blair Witch after a decade of watching a certain style of film, and this completely was experimental. In fact, really experimental, to the point where they gave the actors the cameras, and they had two different types of footage style. You had film and video, and the actors were only barely rehearsed. Basically, they were going off of notes every night from the directors, who were literally stalking them, sitting there with binoculars and everything, watching these guys. And that experimental cinema comes through in the film. It is grainy, it is raw, it is shaky, all of that stuff that I think sometimes people were bothered by, I think really made it feel very real. And it drove me nuts when people immediately got angry at the film because they thought they were going to a snuff film, right? They thought it actually happened because they believed a viral advertisement. And they're like, well, this movie is just a stunt. And I'm like, all movies are stunts. When you have Robert De Niro gained 50 pounds, and they tell you that he gained 50 pounds, and you go to see a fat Robert De Niro or a naked Nicole Kidman with her husband, that is a stunt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some are socially acceptable stunts, and I thought that this one worked perfectly because it's all about the emotion. So how about, what did you guys think of some of the, I don't want to call it found footage, but they worked with non-actors a lot.
Right.
And they basically got the town of Burkittsville or wherever they actually shot it to kind of join in on this. How did you think that helped with the reality of the movie?
Yeah, I thought it did a great job, actually, because when you watch a documentary, that is what you get. You get these hayseeds that say weird things and feel like they're not scripted. And since that was what they were going for them to use non-actors, I think really helped them to create a documentary. I mean, that's what it felt like. It felt like a not particularly well-made student, documentary.
Yeah. How about the idea that so much of the movie is basically them walking through the woods? I think what really interested me is that it's not a woods that looks scary.
No.
This is like, it could be anybody's woods. It could be the woods outside of my house. And yet the actors themselves and the way that it's shot seems to make it creepier. Well, what were your thoughts when you were first watching it?
Well, it's a funny thing, because one of the things that I think makes this movie so effective is that it doesn't feel like any other Spooky Into the Woods movie. It feels like when you go and you get lost and you're irritated and your shoes are wet. And then your friends are driving you crazy. Yep. And nobody knows what they're doing. And so the more insecure you get about where you are and what you're doing, the bitchier you become, and the more everybody else drives you crazy. And really, that's 2/3 of the movie. It's right. Not until it's like day 3, they're all starving, they're all terrified, and there are these creepy stick dolls, but most of the movie is really just, it feels so much like walking into the woods, not realizing how uncomfortable you're going to be, and then just getting lost and being like, God damn it, it's the same tree.
And then, as you were alluding to, as time went on and you started to hear and read about how they made this movie, you found out, well, that's what the directors were doing to these actors. They were mad. Yeah. They were annoyed. They were wet. They were cold. And so, it seemed very real, because it probably was. They were kept in the dark about exactly, what, like you said, the script and things. So they probably didn't know what was coming next. And
they weren't sleeping, because half of it was filmed at night. So they just came and woke them up in their tents. Yeah.
And it also we found out later through the more found footage films how hard it was to make the fact that you're still filming organic, to make it feel, like, why are you still filming? And this one, because it came so early, I guess people weren't questioning that as much, but it did. Even looking back on it now, it still feels like they needed the light from the camera. So that was perfectly logical reason to keep it on.
Yeah, and I think you kind of forgive it too, because you're emotionally connected. And I think that's something that separates it from most of the found footage films, is that this feels like a real documentary. When you see Josh Leonard hungover and tired in the very first scene, he's hungover and tired. He's not acting this. Yeah. And so this movie is really creating a documentary, whereas the others are trying to pretend they're not documentaries. They're trying to pretend that they're found footage. And the thing that kills me about found footage movies is there's always people who are going, fuck, I'm so scared. Fuck, I'm really scared. Fuck. And it's like, no, when you hear something that makes a noise, everybody just freezes. Yeah. And you wait to hear what's going to happen next. Yeah. Or you just make a gibberish sound, or you laugh, whatever it is. And the responses in here are absurd at times, and yet somehow realistic. And I think the movie also does this thing where it's kind of postmodern, because in the very beginning of the film, there are jokes about what they're doing. They're like making fun out of the Halloween decorations in Burkittsville. They're talking about the haunted marshmallows, and and there's such a self-importance to the documentarian. Heather, she's trying to be so big and everything, and all of that feels like a wink and a nod that Scream was very overt and on the nose about. This just seemed to be able to take people from the very beginning of the movie, where they're coming in going, oh, this is supposed to be really scary. It's supposed to be true. I'm not going to be scared. And they're watching it. In the first 5 minutes, you're laughing along with all the in-jokes, because the group itself isn't taking this serious until they're in the woods. And even then, they're pretty good about it till they really get cold, really get wet, and start getting separated.
Yeah, and like anything else that becomes such a piece of popular culture, the bigger it got, then you started to get the backlash. People that, like you're saying, took that challenge, like, oh, okay, it's not scary, and I knew it the whole time, and that's inevitable, I suppose, even more so today. But again, when you go back and try to watch it with all that script away, I still think it's incredibly effective. as a horror movie.
Well, we've said on our show before. My twin sister, called me. She lived in Boston when this movie came out, and it screened there before it screened in Columbus. And she called me to say, "This movie was made for you. This film exists just to scare you."
And it did.
And it did. And it's funny because, as three of us are aware, I watch a lot of horror films. And this movie scared the shit out of me. I was afraid to touch the floor when I got to bed. Like I wouldn't let which I know that's something people do. I don't do that. Yeah, this movie scared me to death. It just, horror is like comedy, where either it's funny to you or it's not. Either it scares you or it doesn't. And this hit all my buttons.
Well, this hit you in a primal, deep down way.
Yep.
And yeah, it to really touch that nerve.
Yeah. Open Water did that to me. And once again, another movie that people can call a stunt. But I'll tell you, one of the best stunts I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
Because those actors are without pretense. There's real sharks around there. And I really felt it. And I think there's something about not having the really big fin and the really weird camera angle where it just seems as if it's happening right in front of you and something splashes and you're suddenly nervous. And that happens a lot in Blair Witch, where it's just sticks, or even better, the piles of rocks, where they go to sleep and they wake up and they open up the tents and there's piles of rocks in front of their thing. Now, that could be crazy people out in the woods. It could be something supernatural. It could be a harbinger. But everybody in the audience, even though we're all watching shaky cam and all this stuff, everybody goes, ugh. There's a moment of dread. Yeah. Everybody knows, even if you're in another country, I'm sure they know what a pile of rocks that you didn't put there that are there means.
Something placed that, something built that, and we didn't know it was there, and it shouldn't have been there, and that's not good.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess that brings me to something on this movie. A lot of people can argue this point. It could be a movie where there's supernatural. I mean, it doesn't say anything that's particularly scary or cinematic until the very end. They make it very universal with that reality. It could be that they're stalked by crazy people. It could be that one of them has gone crazy. It could be that there's really a Blair Witch. Where do you guys fall in on?
At the end, I fall in that there was really a Blair Witch. And he had to go stand in the corner. Yeah. And something bad was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I do as well. I think a film is a strong movie when it can be read equally well from a lot of different perspectives. And I do think that this movie stands up from several different types of reading. But I do feel like, in the end, when he's standing there in the corner, that there's a witch. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel the same. I think it says something that a lot of people will talk about it being that they thought that it was just going to be crazy people until that last 5 minutes. And everything that people grumble about with that movie, it all works at that final moment to make it so horrifying. Those two different camera angles or two different camera stocks, quick editing, constant jostling, just enough folks see these blackened handprints on the wall. Everybody moans when they see that. And it's just like, how this is like silent film at certain points. And I think there's two movies of recent that don't get a lot of credit anymore. One being Blair Witch, the other one, the original Paranormal Activity.
Yes.
Both of these movies.
Yeah.
They're pure cinema. Especially Paranormal Activity. The camera is still and the audience is doing all this work. Their eyes are going to every corner. And both of them work on the same thing, which is taking away the rhythm that we naturally feel with horror. Horror likes to upset the apple cart, but it does have a certain rhythm. And this movie creates its own, and so does Paranormal Activity, where you have day, night, and the dread builds because you know what's coming. And there's an inevitability of night coming. And the movie's not over, and it's not over, and it's going to end poorly. So I love that kind of thing. And I'm glad that you guys like Paranormal Activity as well, because everybody remembers the sequels and they forget that movie. When I saw Paranormal Activity, there was no credits at the end. I saw it the first weekend and it just went to black and the theater was dark. And the theater was dark for about a minute. And people started going, turn on the fucking lights. People were having fits. We were just sitting in there. So anybody who said that they were not stewing in their own juice is lying. Now, the Blair Witch got its power from that disorientation or fear of the unknown. And you mentioned movies that can be interpreted multiple ways being very powerful. I've talked about this movie about 7 times already on my show. So I'm going to sequester myself to the side, but I know that you guys are passionate about The Witch. And it's perfect for this conversation. And it's one of the most beautiful films. And I think one of the things that we'll see outside of Blair Witch, every movie that we're going to talk about is beautiful. There's some crazy, ugly, scary beauty that's in those films. So you want to talk a little bit about what impressed you about The Witch or how you felt about it?
Oh, yeah. We both have a deep love for The Witch in so many different ways. The production elements, the authenticity is off the charts. The care with the director put the film together. The performances, all the performances are so authentic. And this is one I love because in talking about it several times, you get these different interpretations of it. And some people, like we were just talking about whether we thought there was real Blair Witch or not, some people bothered by the way this movie ended, too literal or not literal enough. And different interpretations of it. One of the main things that struck me right after it was how it led me down the path toward how somebody becomes radicalized. Mm-hmm. That's what was speaking to me. Yeah. And I know there's many different ways to interpret it, and I've read many, and I agree with them all.
Yeah.
But with what happened at the end and how she was led there, I thought that, boy, in a way, this movie was showing how somebody can be radicalized right under your nose, and that was one of the themes I thought it hit for me.
Yeah,
and just I still love it, and still don't think it gets. I know a lot of people do love it, but I still think it's underrated.
I feel like real like hardcore horror people didn't think it was horror enough, and then there was an art house crowd that was really intrigued by it, but I think they were disappointed that it was too horror. They were expecting like The Crucible, and it's not. It's like somebody else smarter than me said, it's like The Crucible meets The Shining,
right?
And which is brilliant. And what I thought was the most amazing maneuver is by the end of the movie when Thomason is talking to that goat. God help you, you are hoping the goat talks back. That is an amazing feat for that filmmaker, because what are you doing? You're hoping the devil takes her soul because you're thinking, I don't know what else is going to happen to her. Like that might be her best option right now. And that does definitely speak to radicalization. It's like even you can get to a point where you're like, yeah, this is the best thing that can happen to you, which was amazing. But it all starts with she's playing with that. Oh my God, how cute is that baby? And just hiding her face and boo, and she's just too close to the woods. I just want to go, move back, just come back this way. Yeah. And I think that's they've left the village. He's too proud to be part of the, and he's taken his family and really sequestered them in a place that's not going to be good for them, no matter how you look at it, because it's going to be very hard for them to survive. He's got kids that are coming up of an age where they're going to need to know other people. But it's really, it's the image of that lovely little plot of land that he has, and all of those trees, just like menacing, standing guard right outside, just with this deep darkness in there and every time they go in, they get disoriented, bad things happen.
And I think that's leads you toward the path to radicalization right from the beginning, because why were they ostracized? Yeah. Because he would not adhere to their religion. He wanted to have his own more radical sect of their religion, and he was banished for it.
Yeah, I read it as the Puritans weren't puritanical enough for this guy.
Exactly.
They were like, man, dude, you got to go somewhere else. And he's horrible. He's a horrible guy because he's terrible at everything.
And he's an awful farmer.
Yeah, he's a terrible farmer. He basically screws his family over completely. So here's a question. Do you guys think that the witch was in the woods, or do you think they brought the witch to the woods?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It is a good question.
Because a lot of the movie, feeds the notion that the more they are trying to be so ultra righteous, the more they are leading down the path to evil. So you could definitely see how the way they were acting was summoning something to them. But that's a good question, I think, that's open to different interpretations. But I definitely think they were, in going down their own path, they were headed toward troubles.
Well, I think, and this is the case in a lot of the way film and literature represents it, the more they're clearing it off, the more they're separating themselves from nature and everything that's mythical and primal about it, the less they understand it, the more of a menace it becomes to them. Till they're afraid to visit their sister in Vermont.
Well, what did you say? We will not let this land consume us.
That's right.
And I know I can't speak that low. I can try, but I can't get down as low as that guy. But we will not let this land consume us. They're going to conquer whatever is there. And I think what's there has different ideas.
Yeah.
The reason I brought that up as well about is the witch there in the woods, or did they bring the witch, is going towards the next movie that I want to talk about, because what we have a lot of times with what's in the woods or what the woods represent is actually our own fears, our own prejudices that we mirror off of whatever we think is out there. So the next movie, whereas the other ones may have some psychological background, this one is one that delivers the ghoulies and the ghosties and the long-legged beasties from the very beginning. It's called The Hallow. And this movie comes from Ireland. It's a place where a lot of what we think of as creatures in the woods come from. And the movie starts with a quote. Hallow be their name, be blessed be their claim. If you trespass, put down roots, then hallow be your name. And it's from what's known as the Book of Invasions. And the people in Ireland in medieval times didn't believe that the Gaelic-speaking people were native to their land. So from the very beginning, it was about people who don't belong on the island taking over the island and taking some of the land. And I think that that's a big part of what happens in this movie. You have the introduction of deity. The island deities that are in the woods, the people who are the goddess Danu's children, are part of what brings the Book of Invasions together. And it all kind of plays into a modernization of this constant struggle that Ireland has had about interlopers and people taking away with this movie, The Hallow. Have either of you ever been to Ireland?
No, although we're Irish. It's funny. All four of my grandparents are immigrants from Ireland, but we have not. We will one of these days.
We will.
I think I'm one of 6 kids. I'm the only one who hasn't been there yet.
I'm Irish and German, and I went twice. And the one thing that I can say about Ireland is it's extremely modern. There's a lot of humor, to say the least. There's some serious bitterness too. But the thing that's funny is that it's almost like an offhand thing that there's a certain belief system still in, like fairy mounds.
Oh,
so they'll make roads that go around fairy mounds. They won't go into certain parts of the woods because of it. And they're not what you would consider terribly superstitious. They're Catholic, but it's a different kind of Catholic than what we know. It's a Catholic that has this old world that's fused into it. And I think what The Hallow is, to me, is a great example of a modern folk horror film, where we're going back to a time. It doesn't have to go historically, chronologically in history back to a certain time, but that old time is still with us, hiding somewhere. And in this movie, it's the land is still alive. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts were about The Hallow, or do you want to give a little bit of an idea of what the plot is?
Sure, because I think that the plot. So, a young man takes his family. He's got a job, and he's there to survey. Right, this old growth forest, and they move into a house. They're immediately taking these bars off the window and not understanding. And immediately they have problems, and they're blaming it on the superstitious neighbors, who, of course, we come to realize are just warning them that the Hallow is going to take them. That you just can't go in there. It's not ready for people, and it's an ecological horror that. We can't just take everything. We can't. We have to leave some of it so that they don't fight back and take us, which is really, in the end, that's what the story is. It's like, which is not that much unlike The Witch, really, is we don't, as a human race, have to feel like we have to conquer all of this land, because we cannot. It is stronger than us. And also, we don't need to. What's the point? And so, and I think that in the end, in the sort of the last image that you see as the film closes is that maybe it's time for the Hallow to to take Ireland back.
That's a very interesting point, because I think there's the idea of ecological horror really rings true with this film, because they bring in a kind of a contemporary feel to it. It's taking place right after the worldwide fiscal crisis, and you have the EU just falling apart, and Greece is selling off their valuable landscape as well as their forests, and here we are having Ireland doing the same thing. So it's like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, that kind of thing. And you not only have the worry of we're going to get rid of everything that is worth our heritage, but there's also, you don't know what's out there.
Yeah.
We don't know what's at the center. There's all that stuff that you can read in National Geographic where, the rainforest is disappearing and there's probably a cure for cancer that's dying every time that there's a plant that we don't know about, blah. All of that stuff. There's a certain aspect of that that's in this movie, which is the weird fungus that grows.
Yep.
So he's a surveyor, and he's also from London. So that's another strike against him, being in this small town in Ireland. And he's out there putting X's on the trees that he's going to get rid of. And he finds the carcass of a deer that's literally like stuck to the wall with this terrible fungus that's ripped through its brain. And it's based on a real fungus that's out there, which is the zombie fungus. It gets in ants and smashes through their carapace, and then that ant is kind of controlled to go back into where the rest of the ants are, and all the ants become food. So you have this idea that if you go into the Hallow, you may not only get rid of something that's valuable, but something may bite you back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what's really interesting is that this movie kind of has the woods striking back and growing in places it's not supposed to grow, like car engines. The director's name is Corin Hardy, and he described the film as Straw Dogs meets Pan's Labyrinth. And that was pretty insane. I would have never thought of those two together. But I think there's something really interesting about the customs and how standoffish the people are in the film. What do you think about the legends that seem to be rolling around in this movie, and how they're kind of allegories to the mindset of the EU and Ireland at this point?
Yeah, no, I thought I do. And I don't think that they seemed far-fetched or forced, to sort of fit the modern narrative. I thought they did a nice job of coming up with very realistic sort of folklore and fables. And I think it's interesting between this and also The Witch that the terror at the heart of this is what has happened to the baby, which is that's a primal fear that everybody, and I think they deliver it really well here. This, which is the real baby? Is there a real baby? Well, he's crazy because he's got this fungus, but still, that baby's going to drown. Like, I think that there is something so horrifying about the changeling fable. And I think that it's not always delivered as well as it is in this movie. I think that they really nail it. Yeah,
I thought that this movie, it's one of several, and I'm going to have to talk to some Irish filmmakers, because since about 2005 or so, there's been a spate of really interesting Irish horror films, starting with a movie called Isolation that took place on Corn. Yeah, holy cow, that was crazy. And another movie called Without Name, which just came out a few.
We just saw that because you recommended it. We just watched that the other day.
Yeah, it's a really interesting film, once again, about the persuasiveness of nature. And there are several other horror films, Wakewood, which was one of the Hammer films, the idea of messing with nature, getting too close to it, but also other people who are embracing the old ways or surrendering to the old ways, depending upon which way you want to look at it. And I wonder what's going on in Ireland. I'd love to find out what the Irish perspective is in horror, and why folk horror seems to be on the upswing, especially around not just viruses, but real goblins and stuff. Right. This movie has terrifying goblins.
I think it's one of the things that it does particularly well, and actually reminded me of another Irish horror film, Grabbers, which we love.
Oh, yes.
With a limited budget, what they both did was make these great little monster movies.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes these movies as well so cool is they may not all have big budgets. In fact, most of them probably have very small budgets, but it's kind of like the Doctor Who thing from the 1970s. When Doctor Who was in the studio in the 70s, it looked like a piece of crap. It was all cheesy and everything. But every time they'd go out in the woods in England, it all of a sudden looked real and creepy and fun. And all it was is they had really good production value once they got outside of the damn stage. But I think that this movie had a really interesting bit between the mother and the husband, the husband and the wife, that in the end, she has to basically, in a way, he's kind of like the father in The Witch. He puts them in a terrible situation.
Yes.
But instead of the mother in The Witch who kind of goes along with the crazy, you have this wife who realizes she has to make a choice.
Yeah.
And she makes the choice that so many fairy tale mothers do. We're going to take the kid. We're going to leave the father to his own devices, literally in the woods.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know how much we want to give away, but I
know.
Yeah. They toy with that notion. I think in a really effective way, the way sort of the third act plays itself out. I thought that they really ask you to look closely at that and that her trouble with that and the resolution is amazing.
And it's such a great slow burn in that way, because 2/3 of the movie, there is inference that something strange is going on. You see blinks of things out in the woods, a flash bulb goes off, and you see some kind of character, but you're really not sure just how crazy things are going to get. And when
the trunk.
Oh man, the trunk. Oh geez, there are so many interesting scenes that are great reveals, great horror reveals that went much further than I expected. You know, you're used to maybe the one or two monsters that are showing up, but Corin Hardy really put it all out there on the line. He's either going to, and I thought it was great because up till then you have a movie that is more about tensions, and then it just says, no, this is creepy crawly, crazy monster stuff. If you want to walk out, you can, but if you stick around, this is really going to get dark.
Yeah,
and I give it a lot of credit for that dark. So the next film we're going to discuss delves into, sure, the supernatural, but it also delves into the psychological side of the woods. When I mentioned that unconscious mind idea along with the supernatural, let's replace Irish forests with the dense, thick woods of northern Sweden. And that's in the movie The Ritual. And I think what is really interesting in The Ritual is that it delves into the nature of guilt, but it also examines cowardice, which I think is a super rare for a horror film. You usually have the bad guy who's a coward, but you never have the lead as the coward. So what were your feelings watching this movie?
Yeah, this is one that we were tipped off to because it's Netflix. It's a Netflix. And they have had, I think they're starting to get known a little bit more for some of their productions. I mean, they just got some Oscar attention for Mudbound.
And of course they had Beast of No Nation.
Beast of No Nation, yeah. Right. So this one is another one that I think is a bit of a feather in their cap because it's well done. And it's once it got to the end, it reminded me of something almost for the people who didn't like It Comes at Night because they wanted more to come at night. And this one served it up and served it up very well.
Yeah.
And it also intrigued us because it had a lot of similarities with another film that we love, The Descent.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas
one of my favorites.
Yeah, The Descent was so, female-centric. This one flipped many of the same devices, including the traumatic beginning, the traumatic incident at the beginning. And then made it very male-centric as they're off on this journey. And as it leads toward the monster movie type of ending, it also takes on, I think, some more, maybe not existential, but more life lessons themes of, certain, if you're gonna the cliches of, the paths we take and the rituals that we follow and the sacrifices that we make to get where we're going. I think it works on those levels as well. And then it also works on the creepy level. Once they get to that cabin and decide, we're going to stay here for a while, that's a good idea. And the things that happen in there, and then once you get to the monster part of it, it really felt like just a nice slam bang popcorn type payoff. That was a lot of fun, but also was a movie that you could think about on different levels as well. So we enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned that beginning. Who wants to take a stab at really talking about what that beginning is? Because it comes back through the entire film. It informs the entire film. It informs the character, and it even informs the monster. The monster is somehow attracted to it.
So at the beginning of the film, like 5 friends, guys, they're talking about what they're going to do in their weekly or their yearly vacation together. And they've all grown and they're middle-aged now, and they don't like the same things, and they really can't come to a conclusion. And then Luke, played by Rafe Spall, decides that they're going to duck in and buy some liquor. And not everybody is really pro this idea. And that's kind of how he stands out, as being the one who really hasn't grown up yet, the one that really just wants to go someplace and get drunk. So he goes in, and his friend goes in with him, and the place is robbed. So they hide and behind a shelf, and the friend, not Luke, but the friend gets seen by the robbers. They want his wedding ring. He won't give it to them, and they kill him. Yeah. And so the whole time, Rafe Spall's character is hiding, and then they decide they're going to take this trip that the dead man had wanted to take into this woods, and send him off as a group. But there's a lot of animosity among the group because he came out, and the nice friend did not.
Right.
And they all revisit it, but he literally, he dreams it. He sees it happen a lot as he's working through it during this trip into the woods. But obviously, so are all of his friends in different ways. And then, as often happens, they're out there longer than they need to be out there. They are uncomfortable. Some of them wore the wrong shoes. And then you get that their position in the pack changes depending on how strong they are as the journey continues. So the ones who are weak because they were sort of emotionally weak or mentally weak at the beginning, well, they turn out to be maybe physically stronger, which in this environment is more important. So that I thought was interesting. And it does mirror The Descent a little bit in how where they fall in the pack changes based on this more survival of the fittest environment.
I think that's a really interesting point, because when I watched it again, there was a moment in there when I thought of Wages of Fear.
Oh, yeah.
You have this really tough bad guy, right? And then you have the guy who's, kind of a coward in the beginning. He's mealy mouth. But then you have the real tension. Can you think of a bigger tension than nitroglycerin dynamite being taken up a mountainside? And by the end, he's slapping around the bad guy, the tough guy. And I always thought that was an amazing transition just through stress. And so you have that kind of thing happening with some of the characters that are in this film, where you start out with the obvious woodsman who is like, these mountains were hammered by Thor, and, all of this stuff. And in the end, by the time he gets taken out of the movie, he's kind of milquetoast. Mm-hmm. He's not able to even shut up the loudmouth guy before he says the thing everybody is thinking, but no one has the guts to say, and all of that stuff. And he's become kind of like a comma in a sentence than anything else. And the guy who is racked with guilt, Luke, the coward, is actually showing much more bravery. And yet it could be cowardice. He's scared to death of being in this place too. I think what's interesting about this one is that it doesn't start out in the woods. They're they're in Sarek National Park in northern Sweden. They're up on the ridges. They want to have this huge vista, and they can even see. That's the fucked up thing. They can see their cabin at night. That's where they need to be. We can be warm right there. But someone gets hurt. Somebody wrecks up their knee, and they need to try and take a shortcut. And that shortcut is into the woods. Mm-hmm. And so you have this thing where the psychological issue of what is this dynamic of this group, which is just barely holding on. They're going into that woods. And what I think is really interesting is where this movie decides to go with its beast. It's not a beast that's like a hungry beast just for some kind of strange. It has a real Norse kind of thing. If you look at the Norse gods, it's like one is about betrayal, one is about honor, one is so they're emotions. And so you have this thing, which has to be one of the coolest monsters I've seen.
It is
really creepy,
so weird looking,
wonderfully weird and creepy. And I was like, I haven't found it yet. And I'm sure someone can email me a picture of the actual thing. But I have a feeling that has to be some kind of weird, obtuse god out there, because it is so specific and bizarre. And it really adds to the great nightmare of that film. I thought it was really, really amazing. What I also thought was cool was it's kind of like done in the liminal space. It really plays with liminal space. In other words, you're seeing things out of the corner of your eye. I applaud every time I watch this movie, because there's a shot that they must have known they were doing it for Netflix, because you have to rewind to see what happens, which is there. You think that he's going up to the top of the ridge and he's going to see the edge of the woods, and he gets it because there's sun. They see the sun through the trees. He gets up there and it's just more woods. And this is woods that is straight linear trees, and they kind of blend into each other. You can't tell where one begins and the other one ends. And it's just a long, almost like those infinity mirrors from the 70s. And it's just trees, trees, trees. And it starts to slow zoom in on the trees. And there is something that has been staying still on the tree the entire time. And then it just moves. And you go, ah! And I'm like, that is so hot. To me, that's a turn on. I mean, to really go there with a horror movie where it's so simple to do the other things. This movie again and again plays with liminal space, catches moments in progress. There are attacks that happen that you almost don't see. And that's so terrifying and so wonderful. And it's an idea that if you told people what the movie was, they're going, well, that's pretty standard. Yeah. And yet this movie has a style and an energy and an emotion to it that makes it so much more. George, what did you think of what happened in towards the end, without giving away anything? That whole crazy moment when you go, it's no longer about guys lost in the woods.
Yeah. I thought it was satisfying on just a very genre thrill level, because what I also loved, in addition to what the beast looked like when you finally saw him, but the lead up to that, when you saw the things that it did, and the little gifts it left along the way that they tried to figure out, what's this about? Was this some crazy animal or a bear or whatever? So that ramped up the dread that once you've got to really look at this thing, what it could do, what it was capable of, what it was going to do. And I thought it was just a real, I hate to use the word primal again because we've used it a lot, but just a real primal level, just monsters, realized, and all those anxieties that we've dealt with through the different personalities. Boom, here it is. Everything is just in a primal beast in the woods manifestation right there. And it did look so cool, like you mentioned, that it just was a real, just a base, satisfying on a real base level. It was just a good genre thrill horror movie.
And what I think is cool is that all the movies that we've talked about so far, all of them are about the woods. All of them have a certain look. Some are more on the superstition side or the supernatural side, and some are more psychological. They're very different movies, and they have different things to say about what they feel the woods are about. And we're going to keep that going with yet another really interesting interpretation of the woods. The next film is one of the few horror films. We just talked about one that talked about cowardice. This is one of the few horror films outside of, say, Don't Look Now, that examine grief and anxiety and depression that come with loss in such a strong way, and use horror as horror should be, exuding an emotion physically, visually, and allowing us to sit in something that we would never want to sit in. And we may not even want to sit in this one either. But normally, if it was just a straight drama, it would be draining to a point where you wouldn't want to watch anymore. But this one takes horror and uses that. Now, it's a controversial film. It has, some have seen it as misogynistic. Others see it as the exact opposite of that. And whatever interpretation you see, it is a gripping film that pushes buttons and really pushes on boundaries from the first minute until the last. And it is Lars von Trier's Antichrist. The movie reminded me of like the Stephen King concept in Dance Macabre, the bad place, that some places are born bad. They're bad from the start and they possess people. But then there's the traditional ghost story idea that places get turned into bad places because of bad things that happen, like a murder. Which do you guys think are the woods in Antichrist, if either?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
You started when we were going back and forth about this. You said inside the woods inside us, and that to me describes this film better than any of the others. Is that they've been dealt this horrible blow, the loss of their child. She not only grieves, but she feels responsible for it. And he's a psychotherapist who's decided that she should be his patient. So there's a lot of bad decisions.
Good idea.
And the worst one was to go to the woods. It's never a good idea. I think if there's one thing we should clarify for people by the end of the show, just don't go to the woods.
But you mentioned how beautiful it is too, especially in those first few minutes when they have the tragedy. Lars von Trier can often have just beautiful sequences in his movies. God, yes. And the opening of this movie is just stunning.
Yeah. And it is just visual poetry.
Yeah, it is. But sets the stage for such incredible grief. And like Hope said, they make this decision, bad decisions. She's going to be his patient. And then they go to the woods. And then it starts to play on some of the themes maybe you could look back on that also you can find in The Witch, some of these puritanical views of women as being inherently evil, as the things that they find in books and readings and drawings and things once they're into the cabin in the woods, again, without giving too much away. And then the mystical things start happening with the fox. That is a fox, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and all that stuff, which people can have different reactions to. And, this movie got a lot of talk because of those two very graphic scenes, those two very, very hard to watch things that happen. And of course it is Lars von Trier, and he's going to name it Antichrist. He's going to be provocative, whatever he's going to do. But I think we both thought it was one of his better films.
Oh, absolutely. It's my favorite von Trier film. I'll just go
right up there. I mean, I do like a few of his others, maybe probably just as much. And there's something I don't like at all. But this one, if you don't just focus on the quote unquote provocative issues and the things that he does or what he titles it, and it holds up on a number of levels, I think.
But it's an interesting film in that it's an indie drama until they hit the woods, and then it is a cabin in the woods horror film. Mm-hmm. It's top to bottom. That's what it is, and it's almost that sort of Shakespearean. If you need something magical to happen, this is where you got to go. You got to go into the woods, and then it's going to happen. And it could be good magic, it could be bad magic, but it's not going to be run of the mill. And of course, what they find is bad magic. And it is interesting, I think, the point George brings up, similar to The Witch. I think that for Charlotte Gainsborough's character, the idea that she may be inherently evil because she's a woman speaks to her suddenly, because she feels that she is responsible for the worst things that she could possibly do. And I think, and at that point, then crazy with grief, she just embraces it. She's going to obliterate her womanhood, and she's going to long for it, and she's going to damage him. And her performance is unbelievable in this film.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason that he ended up using her in every one of the Depression trilogy movies. Yeah. And Melancholia is another one that I think is the opening sequence of Melancholia. Oh. I could stop the movie right there, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievable film. And I think the same with the Antichrist, although I couldn't live with myself if I stopped it with that final moment of that first episode, or the prologue, that is. And then there's the epilogue. But it's interesting because if it's a look at insanity like Catherine Deneuve in Repulsion, I'm wondering if there's a lot said about how she goes to the woods alone with the child, Nick, without the husband to go right. And she hears this crying coming out of the house, and she thinks she's looking through the cabin. She thinks her son is in pain. She finds him playing, and she goes outside, and it's coming from the woods. It's a scream and a cry coming from the woods, and the camera rolls up till we just see this huge expanse of trees that goes on forever. And I'm wondering, is that possession? Is that madness? Is that when she snaps? She's working on this book called Gynicide, which is basically killing women, because they're women. And she's surrounding herself with this imagery. Did she have that beforehand, or was this the moment when it became the inspiration? Because she stops writing and she starts doing. I mean, we're not going to give anything away, but there is a moment in black and white, the very beginning of the movie. The prologue's in black and white. There's a replaying of it in black and white later that I'm not sure. Is that what really happened, or is that what she thinks?
Right. Is it, or is it just her memory of it is being clouded now that she blames herself? She's just embraced the idea that this is her fault because she is an evil woman. It is a fascinating idea, because that scream from the woods, I mean, that's what it's like. You hear shit in the woods and you decided that it's one thing, but it's not. It's a bird, or it's a whatever. It's whatever makes scary noises in the woods. I don't know what it is, but you come across those things. And when you're in, a certain state of mind, you can convince yourself of anything. And I think that's often a theme about adventure films or horror films or films that are set in the woods, is that you go a little mad and you convince yourself you're hearing something you're not really hearing, and it plays with you, and I think that there's definitely a cognitive shift at that moment in the film. There's a lot about the movie; it's very dreamy, that maybe just mirrors her, crumbling mentally. It's hard, like the fox. It's hard to decide exactly, is this the magic of the woods? Are we supposed to think this is happening? Is this their weirded out thought processes right now? And that doesn't always work in a film, but it works beautifully in this film.
Yeah, and I don't know why it works so well, but it does. They set up something early. She says there's wind blowing in the window, and she goes, "That's the devil's breath." She says that the woods are Satan's church. And the person who finds the fawn with the fetus, dead fetus hanging out of it, and the person who finds the fox that is eating itself, it's Defoe. It's he, and not her. But the wind blows right before he sees any of these things, like there's some kind of inference. And it's just creepy enough when you have a character that shouldn't speak say chaos reigns,
right.
You're either going to laugh out loud or you're going to go, holy shit. And this movie walks that tightrope, and it works successfully because I think they earn it. The acting in this movie, there are only two characters. There's a third and a fourth character. Well, we meet Nick, who's the child, but he's gone pretty early. But we hear about a doctor, but we don't see a doctor. We don't see anybody except the whole world are these two people. And the acting, Van Trier said that he had paralyzing depression before he made this film. He had it for 3 years, and he didn't think he would ever make a film again. This kind of was his therapy. And he said that his therapist was kind of like Defoe. And so, wow, I mean, that's some serious immersion therapy right there.
Yeah.
But keep the millstones away whenever you go into the psychiatrist's office. But I think his real insider view of what it's like to be depressed, and that artistic mind, being the mind of an artist, being able to take that feeling, and instead of saying what I might in some kind of inarticulate way, he gives it a visual image. And that makes you buy everything that happens all the way through the movie, even though I'm not quite sure I understand the end.
Yeah. You know what I always say about his depression is I feel like he probably just saw one too many Lars von Trier films, but.
Right, exactly. He is a self-fulfilling prophecy, that guy.
Regardless, he's always someone that is, you want to see, I want to see what he's working on.
Right.
Regardless.
The House Detective. We want to see the House
Want to see it. That's right.
Even though neither one of us liked the last two, especially the
Nymphomaniac?
part 2, yeah.
I thought part one had potential, and all of that was wasted in part 2.
Yeah. I found it as like I felt that was when he was pushing. There's some movies everybody does where you feel like they suddenly read their reviews. I thought Casino for Scorsese was like that, where it was just too much of what he's known for. It was like too on the nose, and I felt that the same thing was for Nymphomaniac 1 and 2. It was so Lars von Trier that it was too much Lars von Trier.
Yeah, by the end, he was just shaking his fist at everyone. I thought, which just ruined it for me. But
yeah, and that's never fun. I don't go to the movies for that. Although the things that I do go for is pretty strange, and that takes us to the next movie. Of all the movies that we've talked about so far, I mean, all of them so far have had some kind of sinister force at play, deep at play in the woods. It's either a sinister force that's inside the woods, or it's one that's deep inside of the characters. The next film asks, what if there is nothing sinister at all? What if intention and master plans don't exist? What if the creature that we are fighting is entropy? And the idea that there may be nothing more frightening than not existing at all, the lack of existence, nothingness. What is nothingness? And this movie wants to play on that. What if the woods, staying out of the woods wasn't a choice? What if the woods started expanding? And it's growing into your village, and nothing you can do to stop it. Eventually, it's going to take over. It's going to kill everything that you know, and that's the horror that's at the center of Alex Garland's Annihilation. It's the ultimate fear of no longer existing, becoming nothingness. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that there's a bad guy in this movie?
No.
No. I thought it was fascinating from start to finish. Just fascinated me from the get-go. And I'll tell you what, by the end of it, I thought it shared a strange kinship with 2001, A Space Odyssey, for me.
Yes.
As almost in terms of, look, we've reached a point here in our evolution, in our existence, that we're going down a path we're not going to be able to come out of without some sort of rebirth or a new sort of life form. And this, in this movie, this shimmer, they called it, this expansion of the woods, was going to do that for us. And there's certainly horrific moments in this movie. That bear with the voice.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
But by the end there, I was really thinking Star Child, 2001 type of thing. But I was really intrigued by it. I'm intrigued by almost everything Alex Garland has done.
Yes.
And this was just flat out fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love about Annihilation is it's a movie that Annihilation is the movie, of course. I'm not really into Annihilation, but the movie dares to commit to the fear of the unknown. So many horror films will touch it and tease it, but this is really gives you very little in the way of answers. It's unafraid to refuse to explain anything. Things are just happening. It lets you try and figure it out. And it gives enough real facts to allow you to already be thinking. When the main character, Lena, she's at Johns Hopkins, she's a professor, and she's looking at cancer cells. And she says that all cells came from one cell. Everything came from one cell, and that means that they doubled and tripled and quadrupled, and that means that the one cell gave birth to the microorganism, but it also gave birth to the blade of grass and the sea creatures and the land creatures. And if one thing can create everything, is there one thing that can erase everything? And that's where this movie goes. And so we have, beginning of the movie, we see a meteor. It seems like a meteor, at least, and it hits a lighthouse somewhere on the Florida coast. And we just see a little bit of a smoke and glow coming off this thing. And the next thing that we know, we are finding out that it's been 3 years of this thing slowly growing. It's an environmental disaster zone. The government has been putting soldier after soldier, these expeditions in there, and nobody's coming out. And it's just this procession that is even deadening the emotions of the people who are putting these people in there. It's almost like everybody knows it's not going to work, but what else are you going to do? We may as well go back in there. And then one person comes out, and it ends up being the main character, the biologist, the microbiologist's husband, who's a military guy named Kane. he appears back at the house. He doesn't remember how he got there. She's overjoyed when she first sees him, but then she's a scientist. So she starts questioning, how'd you get here? What'd you do? What were you eating? Were they speaking Croat? How could you not know anything? And he starts getting sick as she asks the questions. And we're like, oh, shit, here we go. It's whatever's happened is slowly building up in him. We're watching what we think is just going to be your normal hospital rush. And all of a sudden, black helicopters come out of everywhere, stop the van or the ambulance, take him out, arrest her. And we find out that it's the government. They want to know how he got out. And she has no answers. He is dying. And she decides to go in with a new group. And they're finally trying something different. This time it's going to be all women, microbiologists, an anthropologist, psychologist, linguists, and all of them are broken. They've all had loss in some way. So if they're lost, it's I guess it's not a big deal. And they go into the shimmer where logic, time, physics no longer seem to exist. So what did you feel when they were going? This is the real woods, right? We're going into something that is completely unknown to everybody. What did you feel when they came across the first mutation? That would be the alligator.
Yeah. It was fun. Like the first one, you're
Right.
like, you know what I mean? Like it's like the film had been not slow, but kind of meticulously paced, and then all of a sudden there's monster. There's just mutant alligators. Nice.
And it gave the first little, quick scare, like when she was pulled back in through the door there. Yeah. That was almost like a jump scare from a horror movie. So that all of a sudden puts you on the edge of your seat because it has been that slow build.
Yeah, it's this quick shift in tone, and it's fun. It's a jump. But then some of the other mutations are so beautiful, and then there are some that are so horrific in a way that almost look ritualistic. I mean, you are piecing this world together as the characters are piecing this world together, and it's so there's something so sort of gorgeous and at the same time vulgar about everything about it. And one of the things I like about the movie is that like the most prominent theme really is self-destruction.
Yes.
And why are we all programmed for it? Why did you come in here? And then the larger global idea is that, maybe we are as a human race self-destructive, and maybe it's time to just Tessa Thompson that shit. Just go, okay, and then let this pretty world take over and unscrew up everything that we screwed up. I think that there's a real theme of that in this movie. Like, maybe it's inevitable, and succumbing to it's not that bad a deal. I don't know. It was just an interesting take on the fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I thought that once they're in there for a little bit, they're not even there, I think, 4 days or something, and the GPS doesn't work. Well, that's going to be expected, but they can't remember. Like putting the tent up. They can't remember posting camp. Tattoos start to appear on people who didn't have tattoos. It's like things from each person is like spreading into the other person. It's kind of like what Lynch was doing with Mulholland Drive, where halfway through the movie, characters are taking on aspects of the other characters and wearing their hair in a different way. And this is actually happening on like a molecular level. And it's almost eulogic. It's happening, and there's a sadness, and there's a poignant beauty. There is something, I have a thing that I talk about on my show all the time called Horrible Beautiful, which is where you are hit with a sense of awe, where the biggest one would be, the most obvious one is Geiger's Xenomorph. Something that's so grotesque, and yet it's so beautiful you can't not look at it. It inspires a sense of awe. And I think that this movie epitomizes that, where there are these flowers that are shaped like people. Are they people? Are they the flowers have turned that way? I mean, there are actual plants. I forget, is it sycamore trees? Down south, they used to plant sycamore trees, and people would get married on either side of the house or on the pathway. And as the sycamores would grow, they would push them together so that they would grow together, and they would become one tree. And there'd be like this arch made of sycamore. And so it's like, is entropy doing this, where the last thing that a human being is going to be is this set of flowers? Or are they going to end up being that weird paste skeleton that was up against the wall, which is really disgusting, but very, very scientific, very microbial? And so I don't know. It's one of the horror films where there's dread because as soon as they go in there, you feel they're dead. I don't know what's going on in there. How are you going to unstick yourself from lack of time? How are you going to stop genetic change? And I think the movie is so cool because it still gives you a weird sense of hope. And yet, as you mentioned, Hope, there's the idea that this could be a beautiful end.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is the end. Maybe we are. Entropy isn't a bad guy. It never has been a bad guy. And we happen to be programmed to it. I think they say in the movie, old age is said to be natural, but it's really a fault in our genes. If it wasn't for that fault in the genes, I'd look like this forever, she says.
And then much like the end of 2001, where astronaut Bowman is very rapidly aging, he sees himself in 2 or 3 different positions. You have that once they're inside the cave thing there, and then you see the other being, take on another form and I guess age and decay. And that's when some of those themes from 2001 really got cemented with me, and how the movies have similar themes. But there's also some ecological horror here as well. We mentioned that a little bit earlier in the show, but it's that strange, like you mentioned, the horrible beautiful, because some of it is horrible, like that bear. And then some of it, like the flowers, is incredibly beautiful, or the reptile thing in the guts. That's not very pretty either, but it's fascinating, and much like nature can be, one way or the other, especially when maybe they're saying when we mess with it too much, and we, will then reap the rewards of that.
Yeah, I think that's such a wonderfully astute thing to look at 2001 and see that. That's great. I think Garland would give you a kiss if he heard you say that, because that's really strong. And it's one of those movies, 2001, that no matter what you think of it, visually, that last 20 minutes is just crazy gripping. And so thought-provoking that you'll watch the entire movie again to get to that point, just to see what's going to happen. And I think with this movie, I want to go back to the lighthouse. Once they get into the lighthouse, that is when things really get crazy, and very 2001. That drop of blood that floats in the air and then becomes a psychedelic. The sound, that was like a sound from nightmares I used to have as a kid. That whatever that weird modulated noise was. Noise. It was just so smart, the movie, and it was so imaginative. And I think it's such a great way to end on talking about the forest. What would you like to say about Annihilation before we move on to the end?
Well, I think you're right that it's very smart, and everything that I've seen, either Alex Garland direct or write, has all been so smart. I think that runs through all of his movies, and this one, that's really a great word to describe it: smart and fascinating. As I said, found both of those things from start to finish.
Yeah. Again, there you have it, folks. Our journey into the woods through some highly imaginative horror movies. I want to thank my guests, Hope Madden and George Wolf from the Fright Club Podcast. Hope and George, tell the audience all the stuff you're up to and how they can find you and how they can follow you.
Well, the main website is maddwolf.com. That's MADDWOLF. We're also Mad Wolf on Twitter. And we have the Fright Club Podcast twice a month. We also, once a month, at our home base here in Columbus, Ohio, the Gateway Film Center, we do a Fright Club Live, where we tape the podcast in front of an audience and then show one of the movies that we talk about, which Hope picks them all out. Once in a while, I get to maybe chime in, but she picks some great ones. And we get to show some good stuff on the big screen. So we have that going. And then we, on the main website, we review all the movies, all the new movies that come out every week, regardless of genre. We have all our written reviews. And you can also find our other podcast, The Screening Room, which we do once a week to focus on everything that's new in theaters and on home video.
Fright Club has its own Twitter account as well, Fright Club Pod. So you can find us there and get all the podcasts there.
Fantastic. Thanks again, guys, for being on the show. And thanks for listening to the show, everybody. I look forward to entertaining you all with as much horror as I can muster. So until next time, stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And in the wings is a Hellbent for Horror book entitled Screaming for Pleasure. I'm currently writing it, and we're shooting for a release in the fall of 2018, so spread the word and keep your eye out. More info on that later. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.